The kind of revolution that the world needs is a Christian revolution.
If you want a miracle, you've got to expect it to happen.
You are the recipients of God's grace and God's blessings, and you rejoice in that reality.
Welcome to Life Today Live. This is going to be a fun one. My guest today says that guns are central to human dignity and freedom. Yes, guns. And I know a lot of you are right now, you're not real happy with that because you don't like guns because they frighten you and they can hurt people. I get that. But we're going to talk about the role of it. And what does God think about guns? So buckle up. Chat is open if you want to be a part of the conversation and you're watching us live. You feel free to jump in there. You don't have to agree. You just have to be nice. Or we'll come after you with our gun. No, I'm kidding. My guest today is John Zmirak, and he writes with The Stream, which they sit right over there, many of them. Many of the writers are around the country. And John has a new book out. You may have seen John, by the way. Eric Metaxas loves John. He's on Eric's show quite a bit. And I've even seen him on like Fox News. But John has a new book called No Second Amendment, No First. And there you go, a church and a guy with a gun. And John is really known for his subtlety and his diplomacy, so we'll see if we can get something out of him today. John, welcome to the show. I'm already ribbing you from the get-go. You know that.
Thank you, Randy. Well, you know, some of us are from New York.
Yes, but you're
I'm not just from New York. I'm from Queens, like Donald Trump. So, you know, I was kind of baked in the cake. We're all like that. It's a whole county of New York where everybody is like Trump. So we really couldn't help it.
Yeah, which actually that, you know, this is not the conversation today, but being from Texas, being anywhere from the South, we already don't get most New Yorkers, and the whole Queens thing. Once I actually understood that, I went, oh, okay. So, I mean, a real estate developer, you know, if you just, anybody's bought a house, you know that, you know, some of these phrases, you know, like, you know, that you get to the house and you're like, you oversold that. But that's Donald Trump. Anyway.
This is the biggest swimming pool on earth.
Right.
In the history of the human race, you have the biggest swimming pool ever created anywhere.
Yeah. The perfect paradise. Come and see it. You know, anyway, it's really funny once you realize it. We're talking about guns today, and I'm curious why you decided that this is the conversation you wanted to have, and this is the thing that you wanted to impress upon people, because a lot of people don't like guns. I mean, you're in Texas now, so you're in good company, but why guns?
I had never handled a loaded gun until I was already working on this book. I used to joke that everyone in America should be allowed to have a gun except members of my family because we were crazy hotheads. But then I realized at some point after beginning to work on the book, I decided to get a gun and get good at it. But what convinced me to look into this was first the persecution of the Christians in Iraq. In the wake of the Gulf War, 700,000 members of one of the oldest Christian communities on earth were subjected to genocide and ethnic cleansing. And why? Because when the U.S. conquered that country, we imposed American-style gun control, and the Christians obeyed the law and turned in their guns, and the radical Muslims did not. And then when the Americans lost control of the situation and left, 700,000 Christians killed or driven into refugee camps. And I met some of those people in New York, Iraqi Christian refugees. But then I also followed what happened in Syria, a very similar country, same kind of church, same language, same religious groups, Syriac Christians. There, the Christians did not turn in their guns. They formed militias and allied with the Kurds, and they conquered ISIS. So the difference between Christians who are disarmed by the government and Christians who won't let the government disarm them is the difference between genocide and now there's a Christian revival in Iraq, in Syria, especially in the Kurdish areas. There are new churches. There are converts. They're preaching the gospel. They're not hiding in refugee camps. Why? Because they didn't obey a wicked law that told them to disarm themselves. And I did a little more historical research. It's a classic book by a scholar of genocide called Death by Government, R.J. Rummel. Look it up, Death by Government. It's available free online. Between 1914 and 1990, 170 million civilians, at least, maybe more, 170 million civilians were intentionally murdered by their own governments, from Cuba to China to Cambodia to Germany to Poland to Rwanda. What did all of those citizens, those victims, have in common? Not much. All different countries, different religions, different races. They had all been disarmed first by those governments. Then, during the COVID panic, I looked at what in Australia, where there was a mass shooting and they gave up all their gun rights. In Australia, they were talking about herding the unvaccinated into internment camps. Yeah. In Germany, homeschooling is illegal. In Canada, they are imprisoning Christian pastors for just reading aloud from the book of Deuteronomy on sexual morality. What do those countries have in common that we don't have? They have disarmed their citizens. The government is not in any sense afraid of the ordinary people. It sees them as like veal calves on a processing plant that they can turn into scallopini if they want to. Our founders specifically wanted to protect religious freedom. That was their reason for the Second Amendment. And I did some research. The text of the Second Amendment to the Constitution is lifted almost verbatim from the English Bill of Rights in 1690. That Bill of Rights said that no Protestant could be deprived of firearms. And I thought, that's really interesting. Why did they specify Protestants? Because Protestants had been the ones persecuted under Charles I and Charles II. The Anglican Church was persecuting the Puritans, the people who founded America. Well, the people who founded America on this side of the pond said, well, we're never going to let that happen. So they took almost the exact text from the English Bill of Rights and put it in our Constitution. Do you know that the Second Amendment was adopted unanimously? Not a vote against it. James Madison said the reason for the Second Amendment was if all the guarantees he had set up against tyranny, separation of powers, checks and balances, the power of the purse, federalism, the power of the states, if all of those fell, he said in the Federalist Papers, a militia of 500,000 would rise up to overthrow a tyrant. That was the author of the Constitution, James Madison, the main author, said the Second Amendment was essentially the enforcement mechanism for the rest of the Constitution. It's like that axe you see on the wall in case of fire, break glass. It is the emergency backstop against a tyrannical government. So when you see a government wanting to disarm its people, whether it's Canada or Australia or Germany, remember, the first thing Hitler and Lenin and Mao Zedong and Fidel Castro did was to disarm the population. And we saw it in the 90s in Venezuela. Chavez disarmed the population, and now you have a socialist dictatorship there. Why would the government want to have a monopoly of violence, if not to have a monopoly of power?
All right. Well, okay. So there's lots of questions raised right there. And I fundamentally agree with you, but I know a lot of people have some pushback. First of all, what should the limits be? I mean, because obviously you couldn't own a cannon. President Biden has told us many times you couldn't just own a cannon back then.
Actually, the Second Amendment does protect cannons. There is ample judicial precedent. The Second Amendment protects cannons. And remember, the Founding Fathers wanted the populace to have the same weapons as the military did at that time. It was the same thing, right? The same guns were in the hands of the militia and were in the hands of the Continental Army. In fact, it was local militias that began the American Revolution against George III. And what most people don't know, where were those militias organized? At churches. It was churches were the center of the militia, where the preacher would get up and would speak about your duty to protect your freedom, especially your religious freedom. And then the congregation would go out and the men would do shooting practice. That is where the colonial militias came from. America was created by Bible-thumping, gun-toting patriots. That's where the country came from. That's its origin.
Yeah, I was aware that you could own a cannon. People still own cannons. Did you know that? There are people out there that have cannons today.
And I loved it when Joe Biden sneered, "Oh, you people think you're going to protect yourselves against tyranny with your AR-15s. Well, you need an F-15 to stand against the U.S. military." And I would say, yeah, tell that to Afghanistan. You guys, your army full of trannies and obese people, that because you kicked out everybody else, and vax-injured soldiers, could not defeat the goat herders of Afghanistan. But you think you could impose tyranny in Texas and Oklahoma and Louisiana and Mississippi? Good luck.
Yeah, right. Well, and you know, I mean, and for people that think you're being hyperbolic, go look at the Soviet Union and their long war with Afghanistan. I mean, you talk about superior weaponry, but the inability, and they didn't have great weapons, but they had weapons. Okay, so what limits should there be on guns? Because surely, John, you don't need an AR-15.
Well, I think you do. I have one. And I'm pretty good at it at up to 50 yards. I want to get better at like 100. But you need, the population needs to have enough weapons that the government can't round people up and put them in camps for their religious beliefs. So knives are not going to do it. Swiss Army knives are not going to do it. In terms of who should be allowed to have guns, we already have a very reasonable law that the NRA supports. If you have ever been involuntarily confined for a psychiatric disorder or convicted of a felony, you can't have a gun. So Hunter Biden can't have a gun.
Yeah, okay. But all his Secret Service guys can. Okay, well, that brings up actually a good point. Not about the Bidens. But it seems like when we hear mass shootings, a lot of gun violence in the streets, when you dig down deep, there seems to be a lot of psychiatric issues, a lot of the psychiatric treatment drugs involved.
Like that transgender woman who shot up a church in Nashville.
Yeah.
3 times they tried to have her committed against her will. She was talking about committing violence to her psychiatrist, and the system failed to hospitalize her before she could do any harm. If someone is a psychopath or schizophrenic or really losing it, and they want to commit an act of violence, if there were no guns available, first of all, no one could defend themselves against that person. Secondly, they could just go get fertilizer at an agricultural store the way Timothy McVeigh did and make a bomb. Yeah. Are we going to outlaw all fertilizer because psychotics could use fertilizer? The point is, taking away the guns would only make people helpless. There are more than 100,000 defensive gun uses every year. That's where an American saves himself from rape or murder or other crimes, simply by showing a firearm. Nobody gets killed, the criminal goes away. Nobody talks about that. They talk about shootings, mass shootings in public, which amount to a very small number. They're tragic, but more people every year are killed with hammers than are killed with rifles, including AR-15s. Did you know that? More people are killed with hammers. More people are strangled with people's bare hands. The focus on guns, it is 100% tyranny. And the fact that churches get in on this, my own Catholic church, the bishops are always talking about, we need to do something about the epidemic of gun violence. It's a public health emergency. Whenever they talk in the language of public health, you know they're out for your freedom. Remember what they did to us under the rubric of COVID. Yeah. They locked us in our homes, closed our churches, destroyed our businesses, forced us to take vaccines against our will, all for a disease that only killed very old people. And what did they do? They dumped COVID patients in nursing homes to kill more old people. When they talk about public health, they do that because that's a way around the Constitution. They don't, and fundamentally, it's an issue of worldview. If you believe human beings are made in the image and likeness of God, and that we'll be judged in eternity for our actions, you believe we have the right to defend ourselves against crime and against a tyrannical government. If you don't believe it, if you think we're just trousered apes who evolution accidentally spat out, then you won't think that. You will think of human beings more like an ant colony, where the creatures at the top send down the orders and all the workers obey, and they don't get out of line, and they don't commit violence, they don't defend themselves, they give up their lives for the collective. That unchristian, pagan, totalitarian view of life is what dominates elites in Western Europe and sadly in America. But it's not what America was founded on.
All right, so you bring up the church. I know what a lot of people out there are going to say and are thinking, that when was it Peter pulled out the sword and cut off the ear of Malchus in Gethsemane, Jesus said no, and then there's in the scripture, live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. Isn't the scripture very clear that we are not to use violence to harm other people?
No, that's in fact a false interpretation. Jesus had come to sacrifice himself for our sins. He was offering himself as a lamb to be slain. Peter, well-meaning, was trying to defend an innocent man against tyranny. Jesus said, no, not in this case. I am going of my own free will to die for the sins of man. He did not say that we should not defend the innocent from violence. When he healed the daughter of the Roman centurion, did he tell him to quit the army? No. He said, do not commit acts of injustice. Do not accept bribes. Do not extort from the poor. He didn't say to leave the army. And Christians quickly, as the church spread, filled the ranks of the Roman army. Pacifism was never a mainstream Christian position because we look to the Old Testament, where God himself told the Israelites to fight in defense of their homeland. Now, if God thought that all uses of violence were wrong, then why did he tell the Israelites to fight against the Canaanites? And when we look at those pictures from D-Day, men like my uncle Bob, who landed on Normandy to beat the Nazis and stop the Holocaust, are we going to say that that's not what Jesus would have done? Jesus just would have wrung his hands while Hitler wiped out the Jews?
Fair questions. Here's another interesting thing. In Luke 9, Jesus told his disciples to go out to share the gospel, right? And he said, don't take anything. Don't take a bag. Don't take food. Don't take money. And then later in chapter 22, he said, if you have a purse, take it, and a bag. If you don't have a sword, sell your coat and buy a sword.
Yeah.
And people will say, well, this is not consistent. But is it not fair to say that, no, Jesus was addressing the specific needs at the specific time, not laying down some sort of absolute for all men in all cases in eternity?
Right.
And then the question would be, is this the time to have the sword, right? And what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying that, yes, it's right to have that sword for self-defense, for defending the innocent, not in order to go out and create some sort of, Islamic-style army to conquer and convert, or to commit acts of violence, or to do anything that would be contrary to Scripture, such as robbing people or harming innocent people. Is that fair to say that that's the scriptural view?
Yeah. Ordinary people have the right to defend their families from violence. Communities have the right to rebel against tyrannical governments. And this is something that was heavily developed during the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. The Protestants who were being persecuted in France, actually, they searched the scriptures and they argued and they came up with the idea that if the king was persecuting the church, you could overthrow the king. Catholics in England being persecuted by the Anglicans came up with the same thing. It's interesting. Calvinist Protestants in France and Jesuit Catholics in England both went along parallel tracks to come up with the idea that an evil government should be overthrown, which is not what Martin Luther thought, and it's not what the medieval popes thought. So the Reformation forced the church as a whole to really look at the idea of, does a tyrannical government have the right to abuse people indefinitely with no resistance on the part of the population? And they said no. So it's interesting, John Locke, whose ideas about resisting tyrants were sort of seminal in the American Revolution, he drew a lot of his arguments from the Catholic St. Robert Bellarmine, who was a Jesuit arguing about overthrowing the Queen of England. Both halves of the church came to the conclusion that it was not appropriate for human beings made in the image of God to be enslaved, to be tyrannized by a wicked government. And it was right and just to overthrow tyrannical governments. And that's why the American Revolution happened.
Okay, you're talking about two different things. By the way, if you want to catch up with John Zmirak, he does write for the Stream at stream.org, and you can go there and you get your fill of Zmirak articles. They're very good and very thought-provoking, like this conversation today. And, of course, the book, No Second Amendment, No First, is available wherever you get books. You brought up two different things here, because we started talking about self-defense, and I think a lot of people can go, yes, I see that scripturally. I feel that. I'm on. We all support. You come after my wife. I mean, I'm not going to tell you what I have in my house and at my disposal. Just saying, don't come after my family. It's not a good idea. But then you start talking about overthrowing a tyrannical government. That is not defensive. That is offensive.
No, it is still defensive. It is still defensive.
How so?
All right. If you're a Jew in Germany and they're rounding up all your people, are you obliged to just go passively?
A lot of them did, and they died. Tragically,
because they had been disarmed.
Yes.
One of the first things the Nazis did was go through all the gun registrations, because the liberal Weimar Republic, trying to reduce gun violence, had imposed gun control. Of course, the Nazis and the communists just violated the law, but all the nice law-abiding Jewish citizens and socialists and Catholics did. They obeyed the law. Yeah. So when the Nazis took power, they just had the names. And one of the first things they did was get the guns away from all the Jews right before they committed Kristallnacht, when they burned all the synagogues in Germany. There's a great book on this by my friend Stephen Halbrook called Gun Control in the Third Reich. And you just see how central gun control is to every tyrant who takes power anywhere in the world.
Well, and they didn't see it coming, because in May of 1936, Hitler gave one of the greatest speeches on peace, promised peace to everyone. And if you believe that, then you wouldn't need a gun. So I do think there are strong lessons in history. The people now are going to say, well, Australia is not Nazi Germany. We compare everything to Nazi Germany, and I think we should learn the lessons. Frankly, I think the period, from 1929 up to 38 is the most instructive in a lot of ways. But we don't live in Nazi Germany now. So how do we know when we live in a tyrannical government that we should rise up and overthrow? Because I could make the case that there's a lot of that going on right now. But should Christians arm up and march on Washington? I don't think so.
No, I would say the moment to use your guns is when they try to take them.
Okay.
Because that's your last chance. After that, it's all moot. They've got your guns. You're helpless. You're a veal calf waiting to be turned into scallopini. So that to me is the trigger. If they ever try to undo the Second Amendment, that is the last chance. That is the last exit ramp before you end up behind barbed wire. So
you're saying, stock up, learn how to use it smartly, use it safely. I mean,
use it responsibly. Get insurance. Get gun owner insurance in case there's an accident. In case your gun is stolen. The most responsible people in America are gun owners. When I go to the gun range, those people are so careful.
Yeah.
They are so scrupulous. The people with illegal guns are the opposite, but they're already violating the law. The felons who have a gun, okay? But if gun control only works for the people who obey the law. Law-abiding people will obey gun control laws, leaving the guns in the hands of the criminals and the FBI that's arresting pro-lifers and investigating PTA moms and infiltrating churches. What we're seeing is a radical expansion of government power. I mean, as we speak, the Democrats are trying to put their political opponent in prison. Steve Bannon just went to prison. Peter Navarro went to prison. We're seeing intense lawfare. They just disbarred Rudy Giuliani for asking questions about the 2020 election. The ratcheting up of tyranny by the left in America is real.
Yeah.
And the gun issue is just part of it. They also want to stop Christians from adopting children. They want to take the kids away from their parents if they won't go along with the transgender surgery. It's all part of the same power grab by the same godless pagans who want to turn us into termites.
And again, if you look in any, the worst examples in history, whether it's in Soviet Russia or Nazi Germany, and I'm not as well versed on Cambodia, even though I've been there, and Venezuela, but the warning signs, because you go a lot of, especially with Nazi Germany, you're like, how did they not see that coming? Well, if you go back and look at it, you go, okay, it was very incremental. It sounded good. A lot of promises that were broken, and so where are we now in our own country, in Canada and Australia? Well, I think it's probably prudent to say, yes, do what John's talking about. Learn how to use your weapon. Learn how to defend yourself. But that's not a cue to go out and start committing violence at all.
No.
So when he says, when they come for your guns, that's when you want to use them, and pray to God you don't have to. But I think most importantly, people are worried. I grew up and the Soviet Union was going to invade the United States anytime, right? That fear was out there. And then you hear about China and the Million-Man Army. And a lot of this comes from inside the church. But you know why I don't think you're ever going to see that kind of invasion? Because they know how many people have guns.
Right.
So just the deterrent aspect of it. Pray to God you never need it. Learn how to use it. Pray to God you never need it. But if you do, you'd rather have it than not. That's the thing. You may save the lives of innocent people, including your loved ones, including yourself, but don't go out and start an armed, an insurrection. It's funny.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a last line of defense. It's like saying, should you have life insurance? What are the odds that you're going to die suddenly? Well, still, a lot of people have life insurance. It's prudent to have life insurance. It's prudent to have auto accident insurance, even if you're a good driver.
Yeah.
This is an insurance policy against America going the way of so many other once free countries. Can I hold up the book, or do you already have a graphic of it up?
I've got the graphic. In fact, there it is, right there.
Okay, thanks.
So, and last question I'll ask you is straight from the cover of the book. If there's no Second Amendment, why do you say there's no First Amendment?
Well, because the First Amendment, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, is guaranteed by the Second Amendment, the fact that the population has the ability to resist a tyrannical government.
Yeah.
If you take away the enforcement clause, it's like declawing a cat. That cat is now harmless, and you can do whatever you want to it. I don't think the people should be declawed and rendered helpless at the whim of the kind of bureaucrats. Look what they did during the COVID panic. Look what they did during the George Floyd riots. Mm-hmm. They didn't prosecute the looters who burned down our American cities, but they prosecuted a few Americans who tried to defend their stores from rioters. That's called a narco-tyranny. Anarchy for me, tyranny for thee. And that is literally how the Nazis took power. They would have street riots. They would beat up their opponents. The judges were pro-Nazi. The judges would let the Nazis go and prosecute the people who defended themselves. That's what's happening right now in America with the lawfare aimed at conservatives and patriots, while looters who destroyed cities walked free.
Yeah. Say that 10, 15 years ago, I'd have thought you're a right-wing nut. Now I just think you're right. And so
I hate being right. I hate being right about stuff.
Yeah, about this, I hear you. All right, what else you got going on? Anything we missed? Because
I've got a new column up at the Stream.
Okay.
Called "Joe Biden Didn't Kill Himself." It talks about how Joe Biden should be because the Democrats want Joe Biden to step aside, and he won't. I just think he should be careful. He should not drink anything that people hand him unless he should just be very careful, because the Democrats are ruthless. They want power. We've seen that.
Cancel that barbecue at the Clintons? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe don't sniff any little girl's hair. It might have COVID in it.
Oh, God. Yeah. Okay. Can I ask you a couple of questions about the election? You have some time? Because it'd be fun.
Absolutely.
Okay. You watch the media and the Democrats, and of course the White House spokespeople, of course, defending Joe Biden's mental capability. I was on this program, the online version, at the last election. I said I don't think Joe Biden will make it 6 months because of his mental capacity, because you're already seeing the decline. And I mean, people mocked me because here we are 3.5 years later, he's still there, even though I would say he's not there. Then this debate, I was surprised that it was so exposed. We had seen these moments, but it seemed like they were all just pushed together into a 90-minute debate, and there was no one to see. And I started going, okay, they did this for the first time ever before the conventions. Right? That's very unheard of. No audience, which would have given him a lot of room where he said something that the audience agreed with, to buoy him, to make him. And you thought that they were doing these for Trump, but really they set him up to be out there all by himself, where if anything did happen, you couldn't deny it. You couldn't call it a deep fake, a cheap fake, any of those things. And then afterwards, it was the afterwards on CNN and even MSNBC.
They turned up like a pack of piranhas.
They did, and that didn't make sense to me, because if it had been unforeseen, it seems like you would have had some defending him, like they always have, because they defended the same kind of thing. I think maybe it's coordinated.
Here's the problem with that. I thought that too at first. I thought this is too good to be true. Now I think actually this is something God did for us. God peeled back the veil and let the ugly truth be exposed. I don't think this was a Democrat trick, because they're not in a good position to replace Biden. If Biden stepped aside, Kamala Harris would become president and would become the nominee. If they tried to give it to anyone other than Kamala Harris, the Democrats would have no candidate on the ballot in at least 6 major states, because legally they can't replace them at this point. They can't put another candidate on the ballot unless it's Kamala Harris. Also, Kamala Harris is the only one who will get access to the hundreds of millions of dollars they raised for Biden-Harris. If it's anybody but her, they have to give all that money back and raise it all over again. So I think there are factions within the Democratic Party who would like to push Biden out of the way. But the downside is it would be very difficult legally and financially to replace him with anybody but Kamala Harris, who is one of perhaps the most unpopular person in America. She's like the guy at the Cubs game who causes the catcher to drop the fly ball and lose the World Series.
Well, and her approval numbers are actually lower than Biden's, and Biden's are so low that they are worried. Now, if he steps aside voluntarily, can the money be transferred?
The money can only be transferred to her. So she would have to step aside too.
Okay. Could she say, you know what, I don't feel like I'm ready to be president, and so this other person who's more qualified, whether it's the names that are being floated, Hillary.
Here's my scenario. They make a deal with her. You get to be president for the next 6 months, but you're not going to run for another term. We'll put you on the Supreme Court afterwards, and we're running Michelle Obama. That's the only candidate, I think, among the Democrats who has a positive approval rating. The only potential candidate.
I don't think she wants it.
I don't think she wants it. Let's hope she doesn't, because she, I think, is the only one the Democrats have who could actually beat Trump in a fair fight. Now, remember, it's not a fair fight. They have Dominion systems. They have thousands of voting mules. We have to win so convincingly that they can't steal it again, the way they stole it in 2020. That we have to win by a big margin in order to get a squeaker in the end.
You're an election denier now, John. You can't be that.
Yes, I'm a climate denier too. The Earth has no climate.
Okay, I don't know. That's another show. But you know, the interesting thing, because I've heard Hillary Clinton's name floated, because you go, she could slide right in there as a presidential candidate. Nobody really questioned her credentials, and Kamala could say, I'm excited because it's the first all-female ticket, yada, yada, yada. Problem is that for 4 years, Hillary Clinton was an election denier, saying that she beat Trump and that he was an illegitimate president. And that would come back to bite them. This is a very interesting thing to watch. I don't make any predictions, by the way. If you're watching this months down the line, you're like, those guys didn't know what they're talking about. I'm telling you, I have no idea. So this time I'm bad at predicting the political stuff anyway. You don't want me on that one. Interesting conversation, John. Thanks for going that extra 10 minutes there. Appreciate
Anytime,
it.
Randy. Thank
All
you.
right, there's John. There's his book. You can catch him at stream.org for his columns, where he speaks directly and authoritatively and with great historical knowledge. Historicity, I don't know the right word. He knows what he's talking about better than most of us, and so he's very enlightening. You can agree, disagree, but you will always be educated and entertained, I would say. So, again, appreciate you, John.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you guys out there for watching. You know someone that you think would be interested in this. Hit the share button. And if you haven't liked, follow, or subscribe, I promise we're not going to do all politics between now and the election, but we are going to cover it. So go ahead and subscribe, like, follow. You'll get notifications of more interviews. And we'll see you again next time here on Life Today Live.
You're the fruit. You're the fruit. Exploits